Hello, everyone. Good morning. First of all, thank you for your attention and watching my talk. My name is Alexandre Borges, and this talk is about some advanced threats. This is our agenda. Usually, I've been researching and talking so many details about these topics, but in this conference, I will take another approach. I will just touch some surfaces for encourage you to research a bit more of each of these topics. Let's start, because I have many slides here. Malware threats are everywhere. Every single piece of computer, we can find a different kind of malware. Here, I will show you a recent example of infection that happened a few weeks ago. And it's my motivation for this conference. You see, the hacker found a vulnerability, XX vulnerability. The attacker made injection. This injection downloaded a payload. This payload downloaded a second payload, a dropper, there in pink. This dropper downloaded a third payload. This payload was composed by two parts, a native code and a managed code. Managed code is .NET code. This native code was injected in a remote thread, and this native injected code loaded the managed code. The managed code downloaded the real infection and infected the systems. This is a practical and real example about recent infection. It's pretty easy to load a managed code from a native code. I show you here. The interfaces and APIs involved. It's pretty easy. Advanced threats have been using any kind of usual APIs. Usual APIs, it's so easy to detect it. For example, most advanced threats have been using, for example, APC injection. As you know, APC injection is a very subtle method to inject code in another thread, in this case. The malware attach APC in an APC key from a remote thread. This remote thread is a thread in an alertable state. When this thread wake up, this code is forced to be loaded and the infection begins. In a real system, find threads in alertable state is so easy. For example, you can use a composition of get threat context API and trying to find any kind of thread, call it one of these functions in red. This function in red can be a real indication that the thread is in alertable state. So it's quite easy to do that. Once I'm able to find a thread in alertable state, I can use the key user APC function to make the injection and start the infection. In the same environment, I found a second context. For example, in this case that I presented here, the malware was infected the GUI application, the graphical application, using the basics, using, for example, here hooks, message hooks, and event hooks. And in both cases, it was so easy to find the infection. Both kind of hooks here use the same function, set Windows hook X function, so it's quite easy to find it. My initial approach was trying to analyze this infection by using volatility. So in this case, I acquired the memory dump and trying to open in the volatility. But in this case, I had a few problems because this specific malware was hooking very important functions here in red again. Functions used by acquisition tools, and it was possible to acquire the memory. Additionally, I had another problem here because this special malware was using a kernel driver, trying to hide itself. And it was interesting because this technique is very known. For example, when you attack a system and trying to hide a process by using decon, direct kernel object manipulation, use the same procedure, the same technique. But in this case, this special malware tried to hide its kernel drive using a special technique too. As you know, when you try to hide a process, you can use both kernel variable, PS active head, process head, and active process links to try to hide a process. As you should remember, processes are organized in a kind of chain where each link takes us to the next link. It is a double link, linked list. And usually malwares try to conceal one of these links to hide the process. In this case, in this special case, malware tries to do the same thing but using kernel drivers. It's very interesting because we use these special or these global variables, PS active process head and active process links to hide a process. But it's possible to make the same thing by using, for example, PS load model list, the last variable here, global variable. This global variable hold a bunch of pointers to each loaded driver. So in this case, this malware trying to attack this pointer, manipulate this pointer to hide the driver. It's very interesting because both variables related to process and drivers are belongs to the same structure there in the upside. As you see, checking this structure by using volatility, you can confirm that PS load model list is a global kernel variable together to the PS active process head. So it's possible to manipulate the same structure to hide process and kernel drivers easily. In this special case, the attacker understood that the process of loading a kernel model in the Windows system, since Windows 7 to Windows 10. For example, in this case, a kernel driver is loaded by calling NT load driver. Soon after that, IOP load drive image, IOP load driver, and finally, load system image X. In this case, the cat was, instead of using the PS load model list that is protected by patch guard, this attacker used another function named mi process loader entry. In this case, he got to hide the kernel driver hooking all the memory functions used by memory acquisition tools and preventing me to dump the malware binary from the memory. This trick apparently was fixed in recent versions of Windows 10, but 3 days ago I saw another trick using the same approach, or almost the same approach, so it's very dangerous in the nowadays. I've been working with anti-reversing techniques. As you know, most advanced protectors like Temida, Artisan, Agile, and VM Protect use different anti-reversing techniques for prevention of any kind of analysis. In my daily work, I try to decompose the problem by several parts. And I have using, for example, IDA Pro and write some scripts to analyze and deobfuscate each of these parts. In this case, it's pretty easy to write a IDA Pro plugin. For example, here I'm leaving my step-by-step procedure for helping to set up the IDA Pro in your machine by using IDA Pro in Visual Studio. So 1, 2, 3, and here I wrote a very simple example about IDA Pro plugin. In this case, my plugin is able to find web links inside the binary, but I try to comment line by line for help you here. And as you see, my plugin is able to find, for example, it's a very simple plugin, it finds web links inside a binary. Imagine this example expanded to a much more complex case related to unpacking, related to deobfuscation. So I always try to encouraging people to write new IDA Pro plugins and trying to analyze complex malwares. For example, here I pick up one of the domains found by plugin and input in my tool named Malware View to gather additional information. I've been researching several kinds of obfuscators. In several, I have done a very deep research in obfuscation and anti-reversing. Advanced obfuscator has used several hard tricks to circumvent. For example, some obfuscator try to protect the memory for prevention of dumping the memory. Other obfuscators, most of them encrypt all of the strings. Most of them try to manipulate the import address table. These advanced obfuscators usually virtualize all of the instructions. Most of them is stacked based, so it's so complicated to analyzing statically. Most of them try to encrypt instructions in the memory, so you must decrypt instructions in the memory before analyzing it. When I'm handling .NET obfuscator, most of them trying to rename class, methods, fields, and external references. These obfuscator, for example, like VM protects, are polymorphic. In this case, one function can be turned in several different functions each time. This obfuscator trying to make some fake push instructions, insert lots of useless code, trying to reorder the flow trying to use code flattening that I will show you in the next slides. Use very different debugger and VM techniques. Some of these obfuscators don't virtualize plugs and epilogues. And here we have a practical case here about code flattening. The instructions are fetched and decoded. There is a dispatcher which takes us to the right handler, and this handler is responsible for executing our instruction or virtualizing instruction. A bit more deeper. When you analyze virtualized code, you will see several index references. These index reference take us to the encrypted instructions. The encrypted instructions is decoded, take us to the decrypted instructions. These decrypted instructions take us to the function pointer, and finally, the function pointer takes us to the handler. This handler is responsible for executing our instruction, our virtualized instruction. This is a very easy program. As you see, we have here a linear execution, but after applying code flattening, you will see a very different picture. For example, here we have a linear execution. In the IDA Pro is quite easy. But after using code flattening, we have a multi-branch execution. And in this case, it can, for example, using obfuscator WFVM. This is open software that you can apply some anti-reversing techniques, and among them, code flattening. At the bottom, I show you how to do that. After applying code flattening, I have a multi-branch execution, as you can see in the IDA Pro. This is another very common trick used by dispatchers. In this case, we have opaque predicate and anti-disassembly technique. As you can see, we have false conditional instructions here because we have an XOR there. So this XOR EAX makes everything unconditional jump. And additionally, as you can see, we have an anti-disassembly technique there because I'm jumping to an address +1, and this address not exists. So we need to undefine the code and define again, skipping a byte. Here we have stack manipulation, a very simple stack manipulation technique. As you see, this return is a false return. It's only a jump for the last instruction in red. So apparently is a jump, but in this case, this jump is only skipping the blue instructions to the last instruction, and finally I'm returning from this program. This is a very strange anti-VM technique that I found some weeks ago, because this technique uses temperature. I found that virtual machines don't have any kind of a temperature probe, so I tried to test it. In this case, I wrote a very simple C# program. This C# program was testing the temperature in a virtual machine. As you can see at the bottom, I received a null reference exception, and I tried to investigate this fact. And investigating, I found that, in fact, Indeed, we don't have any kind of temperature probe inside a virtual machine. So I was able to write a new C# program detecting if my malware was or not running in a virtual machine. As you see, I got it, and I have seen this kind of technique in very advanced malwares in the last few weeks. Other approach here is .NET malwares. .NET malwares are so complicated, very complicated. Usually, we try to make the same approach. We try to unpack and decrypt the embedded research. We try to unpack the native code from memory. We try to find the decryption routine. We try to decompile the code by using common tools, but almost of them using some kind of packers. Additionally, I have using these tools here at bottom in green to analyze some .NET malwares. Here we have some very low instructions used by .NET malwares. These instructions are some kind of references for find malicious code inside a malware. Most of the time, we find hookings and decryption routines inside the class constructor cctor or the instance constructor like ctor. In both cases, we have sometimes some difficulty to decrypt this code. I believe that 2 months ago, I saw a very different malware trying to compromise the JIT, the just-in-time runtime. And the JIT is responsible for create the native code from a managed code. This case was very hard because Windows the Defender wasn't able to detect it. And in the last DEFCON, I talked to Microsoft engineer, and the Microsoft added this special case in the new versions of Windows Defender. Some malwares try to compromise the runtime, the .NET runtime, CLR. Here we have a very simple manifest. I try to comment for helping. These are manifests in .NET. Here I start a debug session to find a malware. So I loaded the SOS extension. I dumped the domains. I switched the thread to thread 0. I list the managed threads using bang threads. I listed the stack, the managed stack. At bottom, I found the main function of our malware. I listed the method table from this malware. As you see, we have different classes here. I pick up one. I dumped the method table of this specific class. I was able to find several functions in 2 slides. I pick up one of this function. I disassemble it by using bang u and the address of this function. As you see, we found some interesting functions here at bottom. I dumped the intermediate language of this function. So in this case, I'm able to make a better analysis. And finally, using WinDebug, I dumped some IP address from memory, and I was able to proceed my investigation. Other class of malwares are rootkits. Rootkits are complicated because they use device drivers, and most people don't know about device drivers. Basically, rootkits using device drivers trying to skip the driver stack to avoid being detected by monitors and trying to talk with lower drivers, as I show at right. It's quite easy to investigate this kind of rootkits. In this case, I'm using the WinDebug again. I can gather some information about the driver. I can list the device objects from this driver. I've taken one, and I made an overlay to get additional information. And I was able to detect that two handlers was manipulated. As you see, all of these handlers are the same address except two of them. I took one, disassembled. I found a call, yellow. I disassembled again. And I was able to detect that is a malicious driver. In this case, I used the volatility. I dumped this driver from the memory. I fixed the image base. At bottom, I collect information from the import address table, and it was quite easy. I opened in the IDA Pro, and I was able to analyze this specific malware. This is a very common and usual procedure to analyze rootkits every single day. In this case, this rootkit was trying to hide it itself when we tried to list them in a directory. But we have further techniques to hide the rootkits. For example, some rootkits infect your machine and force a reboot by using this special API, ZW raise hard error. Other rootkits trying to compromise the ZW corporate function because this special function is used by several antivirus programs. Other rootkits trying to prevent of being unloaded by hooking the driving unload routines. Some of them trying to compromise the debug process by compromise the interrupt one. And almost all of the modern rootkits hide itself in a hide storage in your disk driver. These rootkits have been using callback functions. We have several classes of callback functions. Callback functions is a kind of modern hook. This is a kind of notification. When something happens, the malware takes some actions based on the event. So we have different callback functions here. And for example, one very famous callback functions is CM register callback. This special one is very interesting because when you try to remove an entry from the registry, the malware, the rootkit, is able to reinsert again. We can list the callback functions by using extension from WinDebug. For example, in this case, WinDebug arc. Here, at bottom, I listed some image callbacks, in this case, no hat, in yellow. I disassembled this special callback, and I collect some information from the driver. Of course, if you want, you can list callback function by using only WinDebug without any kind of extension. In this case, we have some very short commands, and I'm listing here two different class of callbacks. I've seen different C2 channels very used, for example, Cobalt Strike, Sliver, and Infection. But most of them have been using the same group of APIs. WinNet API, URL Mon API, Con APIs, and WinSock. Modern malwares have been using NGIS, Network Drive Interface Specification. In this case, it's very similar to Linux device driver. I have two parts. One part is responsible for short work, and the second part is responsible for the hard work. In this case, the first part is the mini port interrupt, and the second part, mini port interrupt GPC, using GPCs, of course. Most rootkits using NGIS have been using NGIS to or intercept the communication or to compromise any kind of monitor tools. Additionally, I've seen very, very rare malwares using Windows Socket kernel APIs and circumvent the most modern and protected systems. So I suggest you that you can pay attention on these functions here at bottom. Furthermore, some malwares have been intercepting the communication with TCP and UDP device objects, and this kind of malwares most of the time are able to circumvent all of these antivirus programs by using filter drivers. By the way, it's quite easy to list filter drivers in your machine. For example, here I'm listing the filter drivers in an infected machine. And at bottom, I'm listing all filter drivers related to volumes, related to disks. It's quite easy to list the filter drivers by using WinDebug too. WinDebug, in this case, I'm loading the filter plugin, the filter extension, and using the command filters. Finally, BIOS and UEFI threats. Nowadays, we have malwares trying to attack the platform. The attack can happen in everywhere, in the BIOS, MBR, VBR, IPL, boot manager, or in UEFI systems. In both cases, it's almost impossible to detect them. Here, I show you a complete overview, a complete picture. So we have the flash, the UEFI phases, SEC, PE, GXZ, BDS, and we have the operational system phases. In the other side, Windows bootloader, kernel drivers, VLAN, and so on. We have some defenses, in this case, BIOS guard, boot guard, UEFI security boot, UEFI security boot here, and in the other side, we have the OS security boot. In all these cases, it's possible to circumvent the protections. Some people have asked me how to analyze infected MBR. So in this case, I show you how to extract an MBR, open in the IDA Pro. In this case, it's a clean MBR. In the other case, is an infected one. In this case, using Petya. It's quite easy to analyze this MBR dynamically. In this case, I'm using Box to make emulation. So I left for you the step-by-step how to set up your environment using Box and open this infected MBR in Box and open in the IDA Pro and analyzing dynamically using the debugger. In this case, it's not a debugger, it's an emulation. You can use a debugger too. In this case, I left some step-by-step procedure here to change the virtual machine configuration, set up the IDA Pro environment. Remember that MBR is 16-bit. I set up a breakpoint in the MBR entry point, 7C00, and finally, I was able to debugging my infected MBR. Finally, we have several protections in BIOS nowadays. All of these protections basically try to avoid any kind of malware of writing into the BIOS. It's quite easy to dump the BIOS from the memory. For example, in this case, I'm using the chipsec, and I'm dumping the BIOS from the memory. I can open it using UEFI tool to analyze each component of this BIOS. In this case, I'm able to analyze an UEFI image. Take a look here. We have several GXE drivers, and most of the time, I'm able to find infection in these drivers. Finally, I show you how to use chipsec to detect any kind of problem in your system. In this case, my system is open to write. BIOS is read-write, horrible, because a malware can write in the BIOS. Using the chipsec, my protection SMM BWP is a protection against any kind of trying to change the BIOS area is disabled. It's horrible too. I checked the protection against any kind of change of SPI protection ranges. In my case, it is disabled too. Sorry, is enabled here. I checked the top swap mode protection. Top swap mode is when a malware tries to attack this protection, the malware tries to redirect the reset vector to an alternative bootloader to load an infection loader. I checked my SMRR protection here against any kind of access to SMRM outside of the SMM. And finally, I would like to leave some questions for you. Are you sure that your systems, your .NET runtime is not infected? According to my experience, almost 50% is infected in great and very critical cases. I've seen some malwares attacking the JIT. Most of systems, I'm able to find outdated drivers. Most of systems, are not protected against UEFI and BIOS malwares, advanced malwares. And trying to make a little investigation in your company, and certainly you will find several kinds in several situations of infections, even that your defenses don't detect anyone. Thank you to No-Hat staff. Thank you for you who attended my talk. Have a nice day.
So, thank you, Alexandre. It's time for question again. If you have any question.
It's a quite easy topic.
Nobody? So, thank you. Thank you, Alexandre.